This is Unit 1.2, Terrestrial and Aquatic Biomes. This also covers Unit 1.3, which is the aquatic biomes. So we're going to look at terrestrial biomes first. Here you can see some previous AP Environmental students, and they made some videos. So one thing you should know about terrestrial biomes is there are quite a few of them out there. How many exactly? Well, it depends on the map that you're looking at. So for this example, this map only shows 7 biomes. But if you go to a more detailed map, look how many. 20, oh, not 24, 18. It's a lot more than 7. We're not going to need to know 18 different ones. We're going to look at 10 or so. We're going to start with the savanna. You can see this has a fair amount of grass, some trees, not too much rain, not as much as some other biomes. This should look familiar. Temperate seasonal forest. And this is what we live in the mid-Atlantic, right? We have seasons, and it's not too hot and it's not too cold. This one's a little colder. We'll often call this a taiga. Sometimes you'll also see it referred to as the boreal forest, but it has a little less rainfall. Seasonal temperatures tend to be lower on average than temperate areas. Now this, much warmer, much wetter, temperate rainforest. This one, not as much rain. And really, at this point, you could be asking yourself, how can you tell, based on the foliage, which places are getting more or less rain? So this is getting less rain, right? There are fewer trees out there. This is what we'll call a shrubland, or more commonly the chaparral. This is commonly found in California and places out west like that. Of course, this is the wettest. You might have guessed this already. Tropical rainforest, right? So you can see a lot of plants, a lot of trees, which means a lot of water. How about this? How many trees? Really 0. So this must not get a lot of water. It's also pretty dry, and it's pretty warm, so we'll call this a desert. Now this looks pretty similar to the savanna, but it's not exactly the same. So these are temperate grasslands. You'll see the seasonal variations between savannas and temperate grasslands. They're not exactly the same. We would also call the temperate grassland a prairie. This here, not as nice a photo, but this is a tundra. So tundra is colder and not as much rainfall, right? You can't see as many trees. There are some, plants and shrubs and stuff, but not enough rainfall to support tree growth. So those were the terrestrial biomes. The aquatic biomes obviously don't vary by rainfall, right? Because these are all located, they're water biomes. So this one, pretty straightforward, open ocean. And this covers, most of the surface of the Earth. So this is probably the largest biome by area. We will also see ponds and freshwater lakes. So aquatic biomes can be identified both by freshwater or saltwater. So this is obviously a freshwater biome. And of course, ponds and lakes don't have any flow to speak of. But open ocean doesn't really either, as compared to things like rivers that we're going to see later. Okay, well, here's rivers, right? And rivers in a lot of ways are defined by the fact that their water is flowing. This is also a freshwater biome. So this is a salt marsh or an estuary. Salt marshes are characterized by the fact that they do have salinity. In fact, enough that it's called a salt marsh. And as you're going to see, this is contrasted with a different aquatic biome, the wetland. So this is more like a freshwater wetland. That's a swamp or a marsh or a bog, but generally we call them wetlands now. This biome is characterized by its flowing water. So this would be a stream, right? Not as much flow as the river. And you can see that, there's a lot more rocks and things like that. It leads to different types of animals, aquatic organisms living there. So one thing that you're going to see with different biomes is that you characterize them, at least the terrestrial ones, based on how much precipitation have, what their average temperatures are, and then also how those fluctuate over the course of the year. So let's take, for example, Climatogram A. So you can see that it has a fairly high temperature all year, and the precipitation varies over the year, but is generally pretty high. So this is a tropical rainforest because it gets a lot of precipitation and it has a high temperature. Compare that to B, which is in California, where it also has a high temperature all year round with no seasonal variation, but not nearly as much rainfall. In fact, in the summers, there's zero rainfall. So this would be a chaparral. In Nevada, you can see also high temperatures, but even lower precipitation than the chaparral, and there's virtually no variation over the course of the season. That's because Reno is in a desert, and this is a temperate desert, so it's not quite as warm as the tropical rainforest. All right, Climatogram D, Aden, which is in Africa. You can see even less rainfall, right? Temperature is a little higher, so this would be a tropical desert. Step over to Kansas. You can see that the rainfall is moderate and varies over the season, as does the temperatures. So this would be considered grasslands. Alaska, Anchorage, which is in sort of the southern part of Alaska, you can see that the temperature varies over the season. In fact, it's very similar to Kansas's temperature, and yet the rainfall is very different. There's a lot less, and it does vary over the season, although not the same way that Kansas's does. So this would be considered a taiga. In Tennessee, again, the temperature variation of the season, but much higher rainfall, and the rainfall is very consistent. Doesn't have as much seasonal variation. This is a temperate seasonal deciduous forest, right? So this is what we also live in here in Maryland. Tanganyika, notice the high temperature all year round. There's no seasonal variation there. And the rainfall is pretty crazy. It's moderate most of the year, but then those 2 months it gets really, really wet. This is considered a savanna. And if you were to go back, you can notice a difference between this and the grasslands, which is the prairie. Notice how the savanna gets that really heavy rainfall during just a few months of the year. Going back to Alaska for just a minute, if you go further north from Anchorage, you're in Barrow. Notice how the temperature is way, way down. It does have a seasonal variation, but it's pretty cold there, and then also doesn't get very much rain. This would be considered a tundra, right? So it's sort of like the cold desert. All right, well, that is our brief overview of biomes. Let me know what questions you have about that.